friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to give you a few tips on container gardening. So I've been doing container gardening for probably about, well, at least 11 years now, because I believe it was 2012 that I started filling up this deck full of pots before we started expanding out into the yard this way. But I still have a lot of pots on my deck, even though we did end up turning most of this whole backyard into a garden. And then we expanded out to the front yard and the side yard, and then over time made those a little bit bigger as things went on. I still love doing container gardening on both my front and back decks, because it's really simple, especially when you're talking about things you just want to get out there and pick, and it's real close. Things like herbs and so on. So I keep some thyme here on the deck. I grow nasturtiums and lemon balm, and I just recently started some of my chocolate mint up here. Even though I have a specific location in the back in the ground, right up next to the greenhouse for my chocolate mint, that's where I grow the main quantity of it. But I wanted some up here on the deck so that in the mornings when I'm pouring coffee and it's growing in fresh, I can just come out and pick a sprig right off the deck. I don't have to go all the way out there to the greenhouse to get it. I think 2012 was when I really started with the container gardening on the deck, and also had containers down in this section between the deck and the greenhouse. And I've used multiple different types of pots, plastic pots, cedar pots, and so on, and just trying to make the most of our space around here. And then one of the things that we did was also I'd had Patrick build, you might be able to see a little bit back there through the blackberries and grapevines right there, but I had Patrick put some shelves on the south side of the greenhouse, and then I put pots in there and then had strawberries growing all in there. That's changed over the years, because as my grapevines did exactly what I hoped they would do from the time I first started them and started growing up. And those, by the way, are in the ground, but once they started growing up and really filling in this area, and then the blackberries and there's a plum tree right there, it does kind of shade out that section. I did have to move the strawberries to the front deck garden and grow them in pots out there, and then grow things that don't mind getting a little less sun here. So lettuces usually do good there. So I switched to lettuces, and pansies can sometimes get just enough light to do fine there. So some of the tips that you have to think about when you're container gardening is that, first of all, containers are typically going to need to be watered more than those things that are in the ground, especially depending on where you're keeping them. Like up here, I've got a shelf here that Patrick made. Initially, I'll show you the original picture. Initially, I was putting pansies in there, but they just didn't quite get enough light. So it's all full of violets now. So I have 6 pots right here just full of violets, because violets seem to grow bigger and do better when they're not getting so much direct sun. But at any rate, yeah, there's only certain things I can grow right here because of the limited sun. So I learned to work around and watch the sun and, pay attention. Okay, how much of the grapevines are as they're filling in? Because eventually, I'm shooting this right now, right? Early June, but you're seeing it probably later in July. But by then, the grapevines will have filled in so much, so it'll just be a wall of green all the way around. And so I have to always be watching. At least this is the south side, so the plants here will get the sun coming in from the south, but the ones on the east side of the deck, they don't get any morning sun, but they'll get some of the late afternoon sun, just because of the grapevine. So you got to be thinking about all your placements, watch your areas through the year. But at any rate, what I was trying to say is, these over here, because they're under the eaves of the shop's on this side, the house is on that side. Well, these I do have to make sure they get watered, because they catch very, very little rainwater. And same thing with the pots right on the greenhouse. So those need more water than any of the other pots that are more out in the open and collecting the rainwater. And even the ones here on the deck, when the grapevines come out over a little bit more, I do try to keep them pruned back so they don't cover too much, but they can prevent some of the rainwater from coming down into the pots, or maybe they're not getting as much dew. So you got to really be paying attention to that. They're just more likely going to need more water. So in the greenhouse, here's another example. Because the greenhouse is fully sheltered, everything in there definitely needs to be watered every day, but especially the peppers that I grow in pots, because I find that my peppers do best in pots, sitting up on a high shelf, so they're catching the most amount of sun, and I can just control them better because they don't get as big as the tomatoes and the cucumbers, which would quickly shade them out. So growing them in pots on a shelf works really well for those, but those definitely I need to keep them watered because they don't have any roots shooting down in the ground that can reach down and pull the water up from the ground. So you have to keep those watered. Then the other thing you have to always keep in mind is that anytime you have plants in pots, be it in the house, outside, it doesn't matter, those plants, the reason they're getting bigger is they're actually taking the material from the soil and turning that into the above ground material. So their plants aren't just creating substance out of nothing. They're actually pulling stuff out of the soil and using the soil itself to make the plant material. So if you're paying attention to the material in your pots and you don't add anything to it over a couple of years, you'll see that soil just getting lower and lower and lower. And this will happen to your houseplants too. Not only do you need to add more soil in there, you do need to add some kind of amendments to feed that soil. Otherwise, your plants are going to starve. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Now, for my blueberries, they're not quite as healthy as they used to be years ago. But I think, that is not so much from me not feeding them. I think part of it is they've been in here for like 8 years. And so they're pretty root bound, but also because I haven't been good at cutting back the old canes. I'll prune them back to keep them on a smaller side. But what I really need to be doing is going in and taking some of the older stalks and cutting them clear back and then leaving the green shoots in place. Now this one over here hasn't had any green shoots in the last couple of years, and that's why it's so basically naked on the bottom and you don't see anything but my nasturtiums I planted in there. So this year what I plan on doing is cutting that back. So blueberries definitely is something you have to do that with. Not necessarily all berries, but blueberries in particular. And then you should be able to see more new growth coming up. And I think that's the main problem. But what I do for blueberries, or any berries really, I have gooseberries on the front deck in a pot, and then actually the currants out here, they're in a pot, but now I know now they've grown through the pot. The wood is pretty much rotted out. They've grown through the pot and are in the ground because they're so big now, and that's fine. I don't mind that. I just started them in the pots because I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep them there, and I love them there in the front corners of the garden. But if they're not growing through the pot and into the ground, then you definitely need to make sure you're, keeping some kind of material in there. So anyway, berries in particular like a lot of acidic type things. So grass clippings, chicken manure, and blood meal. Blood meal is about the only thing that I purchase to put on my plants, and that's most specifically for the blueberries because they are in pots. They're not getting nutrients from anything else in the ground. So they really need to constantly be piled up with grass clippings. When I'm cleaning out the chicken coop, I usually do one full clean twice a year, and I'll take those and put them usually in various areas that like chicken manure, but I'll also put them in the pots here on the deck for the blueberries. Grass clippings are really, really great. And then the blood meal is the one thing I definitely put on those. And if it's not something that loves acidic soil, then just think of the other types of things that you can add. So one of the things I did do this year is, since we ended up with so much mulch and we haven't really been out to the property to mow and bring in the grass clippings, then I just went ahead and put a mulch layer on top of the pots for now, along with the blood meal. Once we get a good mowing job done and we rake up all that grass and bring it home by the truckload, and I just pile it on. I heap it on like this thick above the pot and just kind of make a mound. That works really good for berries when you do that. And so I'll be doing that as soon as I can get some grass clippings. You got to keep adding material to your pots. Otherwise, not only will the soil become depleted, but it's just not going to be much soil left because it will just keep getting lower and lower as the plants take the material from there and turn it into plant. And then another thing I wanted to talk about is every time somebody talks about growing mints, somebody will come and say, you have to grow mints in pots because they'll take over your whole garden. Well, Even though I do have a few mints, I have some orange mint, lemon balm, and the chocolate mint here on the deck. When I first started my garden, I did that same thing. I put my peppermint in a pot. I put the orange mint in a pot. Those were the first two mints I'd bought. And at first they did great. But pretty soon, it didn't take long before they totally packed out that pot. And then they started to die because they had no room to spread. So if you're going to grow them in pots, just like the ones here, you have to keep it limited. You're going to have to pull some of that out to thin it out, or they're going to become too thick for the pot. But most of my mints, they grow right in the garden beds. I have lemon balm and peppermint out front. I have lemon balm and peppermint in the side garden because to me, the more the better. And I've never had my mints crowd out anything. However, I've had it happen the other way around where certain things have crowded out my mints and caused them to not grow as well as they could have. And even so, if your mints start coming up in areas where you don't want them, you simply just pull them back. In the spring is when I do that. I just start grabbing them and I start seeing them coming up in places I don't want. If you're amending your soil enough, whether it be adding grass clippings, wood shavings, mulch from trees that have been taken down, whatever it is that you're doing to keep your soil loose, I mean, that's going to do that. It's going to keep the soil loose. And then all you got to do is grab those and pull them out. I've never had issues keeping up on my mints. Everybody kind of freaks out about, they're totally invasive. They'll take over your whole garden. The worst offender I have at that is my mojito mint that I grow. It's supposed to be on the south side of the main garden section, just outside the garden. But of course, it's growing under the little box area, growing under that, and it keeps wanting to come up in the main garden. I just pull it up and just keep it where I want it. That's how I keep up on it. It's easy enough to maintain. And so if you're wanting a lot of peppermint and other types of mints, it really is best to grow them in the ground. If you're just wanting some to use fresh during the season, then sure, grow them in pots, but you're at least once a year, you're going to have to thin them out some anyway, which is pretty much the same thing I do in the main garden beds. But I do like having them in pots, just like my main time plant, where I get most of my time, is on the south side of the house in the ground. And it's just gotten so huge. It's my oldest plant. That alone gives me far more than I ever need. But if I'm in the kitchen and I'm cooking, well, my kitchen's just right there. Come out here and grab a few sprigs of the thyme right off this smaller plant right here. And it's easy. I don't have to go all around to the front yard and then go get it from there. That I use for gathering and then dehydrating to get me through the year. As you start doing this stuff, you start learning, okay, what issues am I having? Is this getting too much sun, too much shade, not enough rain? Are the slugs finding it too easy to get to this stuff here? Whatever it is, you'll learn as you go. And really, how I learned this stuff was I just did it. I didn't look it up. I just started doing it. I tried to grow radishes in a pot, but all they wanted to do was bolt. And I learned, okay, that's not going to work. And I've tried various other things in the pots. Some did great. Some were fine in the pots, but they didn't like the area of the deck that I had them on. And so I had to learn how to move things around and get things where they could get the right amount of sun, be it the afternoon sun or the early morning sun or the full sun. It's all going to depend on the plant. And but it can be done. There's a lot of things you can grow in pots. And then some ideas for pots. Now I see a lot of people now using the bags, and they have the handles and they can just pick them up and move them wherever they want. And I have yet to try that. I might buy a couple at some point and give them a try. I really kind of like my system the way it is, but I like both the round pots and then also the longer pots like I do here. So right next to me here is that shelving that I asked Patrick to build so I can put anything in long pots. I didn't want something that would stick out too far since this is kind of our entertainment area here where our table and our umbrella are. But also because of the umbrella and being where they're at, it doesn't get a lot of sun, but I can make the most of my space this way because this area right up next to the shop really doesn't get used. And so having a narrow shelf, and so then I use the long narrow pots. And I do that same thing here on our old wood stove that's sitting out here on the deck. Now I utilize it to put pots on. I've been doing that for years. I had strawberries there for some time, and right now I've got thyme and violets and some pansies I just started in there. But anything you can use for shelving, you can. I've had one lady tell me she just uses old bookshelves, and obviously something like that you might want to, if it has a back on it, you'd probably want to take the back out of it so there's plenty of airflow and as much light as they can get. Then you've got the green stock. I still only have the one green stock. I keep debating whether or not I want to get another one. I do like it. I really like it for my strawberries. But if you can't afford a green stock, there's so many other ways. I mean, go to a secondhand store or garage sales or Facebook Market and see if you can find just any kind of bookshelves or any kind of shelving people are getting rid of. And that can be a good way to utilize some space to put pots on, and then just consider the size and shape of the pots you want to put on there. And then also, like I've shared many times, was the pie tree that Patrick made for Ryan and Kayla's wedding back when they got married in 2019. After the wedding was over, they didn't need it anymore. They gave it back to us, and so now it's my strawberry tree. So I got strawberry pots all over this old pie tree. And then another thing Patrick did was he just took some rounds and actually installed them into my juniper out front, and then I cut out the center of the juniper. You can't see that from out in the street, that the whole center of the juniper has been cut out, and I have to remember to keep it pruned back, but then that allows the sun to come in and hit those strawberries on the pots on the shelves. And so that was another way I was able to utilize that space up higher. And then there's comfrey and other things planted below it growing under there, so making the most of that space and still able to keep my juniper there, which does allow some privacy on around the front deck. And so just consider all the many different ways you can utilize your space. Though I have a lot of my honeysuckle now in the ground, I do still have some in pots. Like right here on the corner next to the wood stove is my oldest honeysuckle plant. It's actually growing up above the gutter line. In fact, I started kind of making it come this way because I have a chain coming across here. And then I also grow beans in another pot right next to that. I have chains there, but they'll also climb up the honeysuckle. And then they'll do the same thing and they'll come across this chain. So I'm getting quite a bit out of this corner right here just using pots. And the honeysuckle is important to me. Not only is it beautiful, I love the way it looks, but I do utilize, I have yet to use the leaves, but I utilize the flowers. They make great tea, but mostly I use them to infuse oils that go in my skin cream. Oh, and then green onions is another thing. So I usually in the spring, because not all of my green onions will come back in the spring from the year before. Some of them do, not all of them. So usually I'll buy a couple more bunches from Misfits Market in the early spring, use up the green onion, plant it. I've got 2 pots here and a couple on the front deck, and I just plant the white part. I usually take the root from the white part and kind of do this with it to sort of waken it up, and then just stick that down in the pot, and it's not long before I have green onions. Chop them down, let them grow again, chop them down, let them grow again. I use some fresh and the rest I dehydrate up, and then I use through the year. So that works really good for me for green onions, since they don't take up a lot of space in the pot. And having them on the deck, especially when I'm cooking something, oh, I could use some green onions. If the ones back here, like these ones here, were just recently chopped down to dehydrate, then I'll go check on the front deck. Do I have any ready there? Okay, chop those down. And I also find with them, they do better in pots than they do. I've tried putting them directly in the ground out here. For some reason, they don't do as well in the ground as they do in the pots. So there's just another example. Calendula does great in pots, which is why it's also called pot marigold. I grow some of it in the ground, but some of it I do grow in pots. And there's so many other things. So just start when you're thinking, okay, I would really like to grow this, then just get online and look, can I grow such and such in pots? And most likely you can. But then you'll just find out there's some things that will prefer to want to spread out more if you really want the volume, but a lot of things will do just fine. So there's plenty you can do. You just got to figure out what it is and then make it work for you. Just don't forget, those are most likely going to need to be watered more and fed more than your items that are in the ground. But keeping a layer of mulch on there in your pots of some kind, be it grass clippings or wood shavings or wood chips, any of that stuff can go a long way to help prevent you from having to water as much, and also to just feed that soil and build that soil back up and keep it from keep getting lower and lower every year. So anyway, I hope you appreciated these tips and any other ideas, suggestions for people who do container gardening, whether it be you do a little or you do a lot, or that's the only kind of thing you do. Please share with us down below in comments, and so people can learn from you as well. And you know, the more we can do for ourselves, no matter how small our space is, the better off we'll be. And every little bit you do counts. Even if you can't grow anything outside, a little terrarium in the windowsill or some little pots growing some herbs, that's always something. And that counts. And don't compare yourself to other people and think that you're just not good enough. As long as you're doing something and doing the best you can with what you have, that's what matters. And that's always a step forward. So, and we all, no matter how intelligent or how experienced any one of us are, we all always have new things to learn. Always. So once we remember that and we keep our minds open to some new ways and new things to try things, we might come up with ideas of our own that work best for us, just like I've done. And one more thing I wanted to throw out there. I used to have a peach tree over here before we planted it out front, which never did good, and we finally dug it up. But when I had that there, I figured I'd make this most of it and started planting beans around the peach tree. It was small enough, and let them grow up that peach tree. And it was great. And now I have beans right planted up next to the greenhouse. They grow up some chains, but they'll also climb across the grapevines that are extended now over to the greenhouse. And so I'm making the most out of everything I can. So just look at that. If you've got any kind of something that's just like this weird blueberry here that looks more like a tree because the base of it's bare, well, putting those nasturtiums there give those something to climb on. So I'm actually making use of that blueberry. Even if I don't get a lot of berries off it, at least my nasturtiums have something to climb here. But anyway, there's my final tip. I know I'll keep thinking of more things if I keep standing here rambling on. So don't forget to read the comments people will be putting down below. I'm sure there'll be a lot of really great information you can find in there. And I'm sure I'll get some great ideas as well. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.